Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you might be around the world. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Eric Neiberg, and I'll be your host. And I apologize, my voice is a little scratchy. I've got a little bit of a cold, so I'll apologize in advance. I'm joined today by one of our professional Scrum trainers, Yuval Yeret, and this will be mostly the Yuval show. As Yuval is going to take us through and talk to us about how to navigate SAFe with professional Scrum, building bridges across different types of methods and frameworks. Next slide. Just real brief, your microphones are muted today. The session is recorded, slides, and the session will be available within the next 24 hours on our website. And if you have questions, please make sure to click that Q&A box at the bottom of your screen and ask your questions there. Please don't put them in the chat. Put them in that Q&A box because that will also allow us to respond to those that we may not get to after the event. Next slide.
Definitely. Yeah. And we're gonna give a lot of time to questions today, so feel free to add yours.
Yeah, absolutely. And lastly, for those of you new, who is Scrum.org? Scrum.org is a mission-based organization focused on helping people and teams solve complex problems. We're founded by Ken Schwaber, our chairman and the co-creator of Scrum. Ken created Scrum.org as a place to help people learn Scrum, learn to improve, and learn to really deliver products with greater value. We do that through training, through certification, and ongoing learning like this event today. And with that, I will hand it over to Yuval to introduce himself because nobody wants to hear me talk about Yuval other than maybe Yuval. And we'll take it from there. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Eric. Hi, everybody. Looking forward to this conversation. I think it's kind of a hot seat to be talking about SAFe in any forum, especially if it's a professional Scrum, Scrum.org forum. But I think it's a sign of the fact that we are an open community in this world. So I'm Yuval. I'm both a SAFe fellow and SPCT as well as a professional Scrum trainer with Scrum.org. I'm the only one that actually, brings this level of expertise in these both worlds together. And I use that to help leaders of different types of organizations figure out ways to scale with agility, whether it's scaled up, mid-sized organizations. You can see some of those environments here on the screen. And a lot of the time, those are organizations that are on the frontiers of where to apply agility. Like Eric mentioned, the mission of Scrum.org is to help people solve complex problems. It's not just about software development. It's in different domains. I'm also very connected to Kanban, and the way I got into the Scrum.org community was as part of the professional Scrum with Kanban work. So it's an interesting perspective into these different worlds. So what we're going to do today, and let me maybe move my visual to the other side of the screen, is we're gonna spend, let's say, half the time going through what's going on in the ecosystem between SAFe and professional Scrum and scaling in general. Then I'll provide a brief perspective on some of the interactions, relationships between SAFe and professional Scrum, like what's going on with the product owner role. Did SAFe break it? Is the SAFe Scrum Master aligned with how we look at the professional Scrum Master role or accountability? PI planning, a lot of questions around, is it Agile? Can it be Agile? What about SAFe's approach to implementation and transformation? And what does SAFe say about flow and how to leverage it? And I'll also talk about SAFe and evidence-based management, including at the portfolio level, which is where I'm focused a lot these days. And then we'll spend some time answering any questions that you have. And, I might get back to these topics and talk about them more if you have questions around them. But, the first half of the webinar is gonna hopefully prime the pump for more and more questions from you. So without further ado, let's dive in. So what is SAFe? You've probably seen SAFe, you've heard of SAFe. Maybe you've not seen the new big picture that tries to simplify what SAFe is trying to achieve. Basically, what SAFe is trying to do is to help organizations that are managing multiple products, multiple systems, helping them become more agile. It's not necessarily the best fit for organizations that are born agile, where with zero technical debt and fully decoupled architecture. But when you have multiple products, traditional ways of working, I see SAFe as an evolutionary method to drive organizations in the right direction. And you can look at SAFe as telling a couple of different stories. One story is if you look at an organization that has multiple products and systems and is trying to become agile at the organizational level, at its ability to actually drive towards strategy, SAFe is talking about how do we do that by applying agility at the portfolio level. All of the same ideas that we've used in Scrum of empiricism, empowerment, continuous improvement, those ideas apply at the level of portfolio, but they might require some different patterns and practices. And that is what SAFe is trying to do at that level. SAFe is trying to help organizations develop, customer-centric products that require multiple teams to work on those together. So that's the essence of where SAFe came, to help people apply the ideas of Scrum and Agile, in environments where multiple teams need to work together, and you cannot descale the problem to discrete products that can run on their own. So when you have dependencies, part of what you need to do is to try to get rid of them. And there are some ideas of how to do that. For example, reorganize around value, or improve your architecture to decouple and enable self-serve and apply some of the team topologies for that. But also you need some patterns that help you manage those dependencies. The team of teams pattern in SAFe, the Agile release train, which is the core of how SAFe was born, is designed to do that, to serve your customers when you have multiple teams that need to work together. The essence of that, how do we enable empiricism at that level and close the feedback loops, is through flow. Flow both on Agile teams of stories and flow of features that deliver outcomes for those customers, or at least we hope, we assume they deliver outcomes, and we need to close the feedback loop as quickly and frequently as possible in order to validate that we're delivering those outcomes. Speaking of outcomes, the goal of SAFe is to maximize outcomes, realize business value, and it's not any different than what we're trying to do with Scrum. The purpose of a product owner in Scrum is to maximize outcomes, deliver value for your customers, maximize the outcome of the product that you own. And we're trying to do the same things with SAFe, but in an environment that has more complexity, more teams that are involved, maybe even teams of teams and portfolios that are involved in trying to achieve similar things. So SAFe, because it tackles a more complex environment and the traditional organization, it has some more elements than you'll find in the Scrum framework. Another thing that is happening in this world is beyond the frameworks. If you go on LinkedIn, for example, you might feel like you're in a Monty Python movie. Yeah, like you're the Jewish Liberation Front fighting the Jewish Front Liberation, and everybody is fighting each other. It feels like all of those people that are trying to help organizations become more agile are fighting each other, and they're not necessarily united against the common enemy. When you look at what's going on out there, you see a lot of comments like those over here on the left. Some of them are legitimate. Some of them are what you might call FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt that people are throwing out. And some of them you mainly need to understand what's going on around us. So maybe let's spend a little bit of time talking about that. So if you look at what's going on in the Agile world, and not just in the SAFe world, the Agile world, Agile is pretty mature at this point. If you look at the technology adoption curve, we're currently in the late majority or even laggards when it comes to the organizations in the software development and IT world that are trying to become Agile. Those organizations, if you read Jeffrey Moore's work, Crossing the Chasm, they need a full solution. They need a comprehensive approach for how to do things. They cannot just rely on the principle. So those are the people that are looking for all of the answers that SAFe provides. And they're not necessarily looking to change their organization dramatically in order to make Agile work. So if you look at the different approaches for how to achieve agility at scale, you have SAFe, you have large-scale Scrum, you have Nexus, you have different approaches. Some of them are more evolutionary. I see SAFe, by the way, as an evolutionary approach. It starts with what you have. It respects the way things are currently done in the organization. But in order to really achieve agility with SAFe, you need to continuously challenge the comfort zone and improve and make steps towards reorganizing around value and preserving options and bringing more and more empiricism and improving the flow. If you just use SAFe to put some lipstick on the way you're currently working, you of course would not get very far. So that's one aspect of what's going on in this world. Another thing that is happening is the law of the raspberry jam. Jerry Weinberg talks about the law of the raspberry jam as, the more successful you are, the more you spread your influence, towards a larger and larger market, the thinner you have to spread the same amount of raspberry jam, and the thinner your impact. And that has happened with the Agile world in general, and that is happening with SAFe. So similarly in Scrum, the more Ken and Jeff were successful in spreading Scrum, the less professional the Scrum implementations became. And that is actually part of or maybe a main reason that Ken launched Scrum.org to try and bring professionalism back into the Scrum world. Similarly, in the SAFe world, the more SAFe was successful, the more people, started to use it, and the expertise around how to do it spread thinner and thinner. And, because both Scrum and SAFe are also, a for-profit endeavor for some people. There's an industry around it. Some people call it the Agile industrial complex. It created an environment where a lot of people got exposed. The way the certification term is used in the market, and Ken recently wrote a nice blog post about it that you might want to check out, caused an environment where there are a lot of people that built very early, and I would say misplaced confidence that they're certified to do something, whether it's being certified to practice Scrum and be a Scrum Master, or more recently to practice SAFe. And that created an environment where organizations also trusted those people, because there's a misunderstanding of what do we mean by, Agile certification. And you could argue that even, calling things certification is misplaced in this world. And again, go read Ken's article. And that created an environment where people really struggled to use both Scrum and SAFe well. Over time, Scrum managed to overcome this, you could argue, although there are still some challenges. You built people build the competence over time, organizations build competence over time, and it becomes sustainable. SAFe is behind the curve on this because it's also newer. Scaling in general is newer than using Agile at the team level. So there are still some days where it feels like we're in the valley of despair, in the Dunning-Kruger effect, where the amount of confidence we have is higher than our real competence, and people are disappointed. And we're working towards building back this competence and reaching the plateau of sustainability. What does that manifest itself as in the market? We're seeing more and more demand. I'm seeing more and more demand for, we've implemented SAFe. We have Agile release trains, we have product owners, product managers, we have RTEs, we might even have the portfolio level, but it's not necessarily helping us achieve all of those things that I mentioned here. It's not really helping us maximize outcomes. It's not really accelerating the flow. It's not really helping us develop innovative customer-centric products or enabling our strategy agility. What is going on? And the answer is that people might have implemented the theater and the mechanics and the routines around SAFe, but not the spirit of it. They get stuck. And this is where professional Scrum can help people. This is where, we can leverage the bridges between these two worlds to help us out. So let's dive into a couple of examples. So a lot of the people that implement SAFe, they look at their organization, and SAFe talks about having both a product owner and a product manager. Why did SAFe choose to do that? Why did it break the product owner role or slice it, split it into two roles? Again, it's part of that evolutionary approach, meeting the organization where it is. A lot of organizations, they struggle to create one product owner for an entire team of teams that owns a product, because that single product owner struggles to manage all of the backlogs, and the teams are not ready for that yet. And sometimes product managers, the classic product managers don't necessarily want to work hands-on with the different teams. SAFe decided to go the approach that is different than Nexus and large-scale Scrum, and acknowledge that there's, this duality, that there's this hierarchy in the product profession, and called out the product owner role. The intent of the role, if you look at what SAFe is talking about, is to apply product ownership at a more local level, to apply product ownerships to features that the team is working on, and ideally to even own a sub-product, area within the product. But a lot of the time, what really happens is that if we look at the misunderstood stances and the preferred stances of product ownership, what we discuss in the advanced product ownership classes, is the product owner in SAFe in many organizations, at least when you start, you can see it as a lot of those misunderstood stances. You can see it as this pattern that we see a lot, where people define the product owner, but that product owner is still an analyst, a proxy, sometimes even a project manager, or focused on writing stories. They're not really, the influencer and experimenter, the decision maker that we want the product owner to be. So we see that split of the effective product ownership stances between the product owner and product manager. What is the right answer? What should organizations try to do? In organizations that I work with, what works well is to try and figure out a product topology or a product architecture which allows us to split a bigger product into areas and give the product owners ownership of an area within the product, not just ownership, or at a minimum, ownership of the outcome of a specific outcome, and not just go deliver a feature, and don't just, manage scope, budget, timeline for a feature. One level up from that would be own an outcome, one outcome out of the outcomes that we're trying to achieve within a product. For that outcome, figure out with your team what's the right feature to deliver in order to achieve this benefit. Try to deliver something, and use empiricism to steer and deliver those outcomes. And ideally, over time, you manage to look at that product and say, okay, there's actually a repeatable area of value within that product, and maybe we can split that product into smaller products where they become more manageable by a smaller set of teams. This is a pattern of descaling the solution rather than adding more and more management patterns and hierarchies in order to help you manage a complex solution. And again, if you have questions about any of this, feel free to raise them, and we'll get to them when we go into the Q&A. I'm really going through this fast, and if you want to dive deeper, there's this series of sessions about breaking the safe that I recorded with with Ryan Ripley last year, so you can check that out as
Hey,
well.
Yuval, we've had a couple people ask if you can maybe kill your video, your extra video, because it's blocking part of the slide that they're trying to read.
Okay. Yeah.
Thanks.
Happy to do that. Let's see. It's better. And
If not, no big deal. But that's okay. Let's move on.
no, it should be better. Should be better. So let's talk about Scrum Masters. So a question that comes up is SAFe Scrum Master aligned with Scrum? And there are two main, let's call them gaps or differences to call out. One is that SAFe also has other people. So in Scrum, regardless, how many teams you have, the team's Scrum Master owns coaching both the team as well as the team's stakeholders, and they're expected to really be able to help the team through everything that they struggle with. In SAFe, part of the structure that we create is that there's team level Scrum Master. The Scrum Master is also called the team coach. And if you look at the hierarchy, if you look at the Agile release train, that is the team of teams in SAFe, the team of teams has a coach called the release train engineer, who's essentially the art level coach, which you could say is, limiting the amount of impact that the Scrum Master would have. And essentially, like the product ownership, product manager splits the Scrum Master accountability in case you have multiple teams. I think I see that also as an acknowledgement of where organizations typically are, and the fact that not all Scrum Masters can help coach an entire organization. And, at least for starters, they can start with coaching a team and the team level stakeholders and coaching the organization. And the systems of the organization is a growth pattern. And the fact that when you have an organization with dozens, if not more, of teams, you need multiple people that would serve as the Scrum Master accountability and provide leadership who serves the organization. The other question is, what do we expect out of the Scrum Master? And I would say that the expectation in SAFe is very similar to the expectation in Scrum. Going into the Scrum Master training, the Scrum guide, there's a lot of overlap between what we're talking about there and what is expected in SAFe. It's more a question of what is implemented in the trenches. And here we go back to that Dunning-Kruger and adoption curve issue, which, is the classic challenge where people that approach, um, people that have an experience using traditional management approaches, whether those are people managers or project managers that are asked by the organization to take on the Scrum Master accountability because the organization is, trying to map its current roles to the Agile world. And unless those people get the support they need and the coaching they need to really grow into the Scrum mindset and the Scrum Master use effectively the Scrum Master choices of coaching and mentoring and actively doing nothing, and sometimes jumping in and fixing problems and facilitating, regardless of how you call the role, the behavior would not be the effective behavior that you're looking for. And we've seen plenty of that in the Scrum world. If we're honest about it, we've seen plenty of Scrum Masters that act like puppet masters or clerks for the team or organize meetings, but are not really at the point where they're coaching, advising, or become experts for the teams. So it's a matter of time and attention of the organization, and what do leaders, as they're structuring their organizations and figuring out who should be our Scrum Masters, what are they expecting? One of the patterns that I've seen work better is organizations that actually say, Scrum Mastery, it's core leadership behaviors that we need to expect from our people. It's not going to come from identifying somebody and telling them that's what you're going to do. It's going to come from changing what we expect from the leadership role. And more organizations that I work with, leaders take on the Scrum Mastery accountability, and whether you're using SAFe or Nexus or Scrum, that seems to work better. It's non-orthodox, but it seems to work better these days. But that's a separate conversation. So how about PI planning? What is the concept of PI planning? So a key element in SAFe is this approach that says, essentially, we need to plan beyond the horizon of a sprint. If a sprint is up to 30 days, and in SAFe it's typically 2 weeks, sometimes because we have dependency chains like you see here, and the need for predictability from a business perspective of what will we get beyond the next sprint. And in many environments where people are trying to become more agile, there's a need for predictability as well. There's a need to balance flexibility and predictability. There's a need to plan a release, to plan a horizon, to plan a roadmap. PI planning is that approach. It essentially looks at, okay, what are our priorities? How do those map to the set of teams that have dependencies on each other that need to collaborate? And let's do the right altitude of planning for this planning increment, a set of sprints, so that we can align on what's important to us, how will we work together, and have a starting point, a starting plan for this planning increment, for this set of sprints. Now, there's obviously a slippery slope here, because if you're coming into this with a classic traditional project management mindset, this would be an excuse to go in and plan the hell out of your backlogs and fill all of your sprints with very detailed work, and it will become very similar to a classic work breakdown structure with Gantt charts and command and control, and very little flexibility and agility to react to what you learn along the way. And part of maturing your SAFe implementation is realizing that the goal of PI planning is to actually to align on what are the outcomes that we will seek and what are the sets of critical dependencies we need to manage, and leave a lot of room, a lot of flexibility, or as we call it in, one of the SAFe principles, assume variability and preserve our options for other things that might happen. Even on this picture here, you can see that there's a lot of space that is left unfilled. And we don't, go and plan all of those iterations in depth, or we shouldn't. What we should is align towards what are our outcomes, what are our goals. Similar to the fact that in sprint planning in Scrum, while we create the sprint backlog, more importantly, we align on what's the sprint goal. That's like the PI objective. And we might change the backlog in order to achieve the sprint goal if we learn about some change through empiricism and feedback loops. So PI planning can be very agile, but it won't be if you're not really bringing in, the agile mindset. If you're not bringing in, the right principles, if you don't bring in empiricism, that is manifest in SAFe. If you look at assume variability and preserve options and build incrementally with fast integrated learning cycles and base your milestones on objective evaluation of working systems rather than a phase gate that focuses on documentation, all of that is, part of SAFe. The problem is that a lot of organizations focus on, let's do training, let's, map our organization to these names of practices, to the theater, to the routines, and they're not really focused on those principles, on flow, creating and accelerating flow, on reorganizing around value. They map the practices to their current structure. They create agile release trains, or even if they call them tribes, whatever you want to call them. The issue is not the name. The issue is, do you organize those teams of teams around your products, around, teams that actually need to collaborate with each other? One of the anti-patterns that I see in PI planning is I hear of teams that don't really get value out of it because their actual dependencies are with teams that are outside of their PI planning, outside of their art. Why does that happen? It happens when an organization skips the organize around value stage, in SAFe, a crucial element of figuring out how do we scale, and just, calls the existing organizational structure, the existing groups, even if they're silos, calls them arts, and then is able to say, okay, we've implemented SAFe. And again, that's an artifact of organizations that don't really want to go into the change that is needed to reorganize around value. They're looking for shortcuts, and unsurprisingly, those shortcuts don't really deliver all the value. One approach would be to say, this could never work, and you need to restructure your organization on day one in order to succeed with this. Another approach would be to say, okay, you've done this. There are realities in your organization that cause you to start this way. But what you need to keep doing is to keep looking at, is it working for you? One of the things I like to do is to apply the SAFe principles to the implementation of SAFe or any agile approach. So, preserve options for changing things along the way. Try something. You're launching an art? Okay, do that. But create a learning cycle that observes whether those are the right arts. You might, figure out a way to organize around value, but it will be an assumption that you need to validate. So use Agile to deploy whatever Agile you're deploying, because deploying Agile itself is a complex challenge. One alternative to making a big change and implementing all of these ideas is to focus on flow. And instead or ahead of launching all of the practices in SAFe, focus on just making things flow or seeing how things flow. I've been, thinking more and more about this. I've actually done work in this space before I even started practicing SAFe, using enterprise level Kanbans, what you might call flight levels these days, to help organizations see how work is flowing or not flowing, how it is related or dependent, across a portfolio of products. There's a lot of potential of actually using a flow-based approach to actually start to see where things are and start to see where are the opportunities to reorganize around value, and use that to drive towards agility. And SAFe uses that approach as well. Recently, SAFe focused and is emphasizing even more than in the past, looking at flow and accelerating flow. One example is, if you look at Flow Accelerator 3 here, it talks about minimizing handoffs and dependencies. So once you've visualized and have seen how work is flowing or where does work get stuck, you'll probably notice that things that are encumbered by a lot of dependencies take longer. It's hard to get faster feedback when you are dependent on a lot of other groups. So the thing you need to do is not necessarily to add management patterns. If you have arts that are too dependent on each other, one approach is to say, okay, we need something to help manage the work across those arts. Let's maybe, use what's SAFe called a solution train. Maybe that's what you need. An alternative, if you can manage it, is to actually avoid that, to descale, to look at the dependencies across those different groups, those different arts, and say, you know what? If we created the platform here, an API, if we enabled self-serve, if we trained, some teams, if we removed the bottleneck, a shared team that everybody depends on, and because of that, we need to plan together. If we actually address that bottleneck somehow, or moved teams around so that the teams that really need to work together with each other are closer together, we might reduce the amount of collaboration that we need to manage. We might reduce the amount of dependencies that cut across the organization. And that would improve flow without, requiring a very comprehensive management system. This is the goal of SAFe. The goal of SAFe is to actually help you scale what you cannot descale, but also drive you towards improving your architecture, the way you're organized, so that you can avoid the need for extra practices. One of the tools that we use and can help us do that is flow metrics. SAFe, has its own flow metrics taxonomy. A lot of the work that we've done in the professional Scrum world about, the Kanban flow metrics and how they can help with Scrum can help us use those flow metrics more effectively in the SAFe world. So SAFe has a set of those flow metrics. It doesn't necessarily go in depth into how to use these flow metrics in its different events. So what you could do, and what I've done to help in this space, is take something similar to what we're talking about in the Professional Scrum with Kanban class, which is how to use the flow metrics in different Scrum events, and apply it to SAFe. Ask ourselves, okay, which flow metrics does it make sense to look at in the art sync, in the system demos, when preparing for PI planning, in the PI planning itself? And, are there any events that we might want to add? For example, a lot of organizations add a flow operational review that focuses just on flow metrics across those teams and thinks about how to improve. And then finally, a lot of the work that I'm doing these days is actually how do we bring evidence-based management thinking into the SAFe world? How do we improve SAFe's ability to maximize outcomes and business value through using evidence-based management and strategic goals and steering using data, especially in the world of portfolio. So if you look at SAFe's portfolio approach, it already talks about MVPs and pivot and persevere. So it's a classic place to start talking about the truth curve that we talk about in, EBM and product discovery and validation, and generalize, the approach and say you don't always need an MVP, but you very often need discovery. One of the things to be explicit about when you talk about your definition of workflow for the portfolio level is, what are your significant initiatives that require this sort of empiricism of running an experiment loop? What are the ones that you're pretty sure you're gonna deliver? There aren't big assumptions there. You're gonna fast forward through the discovery stage and just focus on delivery, but still it makes sense to collect the evidence and make sure that you haven't missed something dramatic. In today's world, a lot of organizations are realizing that they implemented SAFe without really implementing agility. And what they're doing is they're trying to apply a product operating model on top of SAFe. And especially at the portfolio level, there's a lot of potential by applying it. I'm seeing that organizations that use a product operating model to inspire and improve their portfolio level approach get two main benefits. One is portfolio leaders, people that are leading, an IT organization, a product organization, start to understand evidence-based management, being organized around outcomes and empowering teams to figure out stuff, steering with evidence, making sure that we centralize the right decisions, but decentralize other decisions. All of these both have the benefit that leaders finally start to understand what we're talking about with agility, similar to the benefits I've seen when organizations start their journey with enterprise Kanbans or start to include enterprise Kanban as part of their journey. But also the changes that we're making by saying, okay, this is an initiative we are going to discover on. It's freeing product teams to actually focus on outcomes, to not be bound by scope and commitments like they've been before. So really focusing on what you're doing at the portfolio level is a great way to steer your whole journey in the right direction. So the bottom line is, it's not about the framework. It's about you. It's about how do you use the patterns and the practices in this framework? What are you taking it and implementing it by the book without applying the principles? Are you including the principles? Are you continuously evolving all this stuff? The things that I'm suggesting for further deep dive into this world. One is the Breaking the SAFe series that I mentioned. And you have a link to it here. The other is a portfolio agility trail map that I've created to help organizations start with thinking about portfolio the right way, or regardless where you are in the SAFe journey, to start including some of those product-oriented portfolio operating model to help you get back on track. So I think now would be a great time to start chewing through those questions, Eric.
So we'll start with a thank you, by the way, Yuval. We'll start with a simple one, I think. Do you have any books that you recommend for SAFe Agilists?
Well, it depends where you are in the journey. Sorry, I'm a consultant. I have to start with it depends. If you really want to, SAFe Distilled is the classic book about what the Scaled Agile framework is, but I would probably say read Principles of Product Development Flow, which dives deeper into what is SAFe trying to achieve. If you look at the SAFe principles that I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, those principles read like a table of contents from Reinertson's Principles of Product Development Flow book that has been a huge inspiration into SAFe. And, it doesn't talk about arts, it doesn't talk about PI planning, but if you read it, you really understand what we're trying to achieve here.
Cool. Thanks, Yuval. So Gregory asks, I know there's no single answer to this question, but agility is all about what can be the best way for your point of view to avoid common anti-patterns where the PM and PO roles are two different people or and different pools of people working in different horizons and not collaborating effectively. Um, it's not as big of an issue with Scrum
Yeah.
because the PO role is managing both pieces of that. So do you have some guidance that might be able to help some folks?
Yeah, the quick answer is they need to be a team. They need to be a product team. And if there are two different pools of people, for example, the product owners are coming from technology and the product managers are coming from the product discipline, you need to work at how do we create, a product team out of them. And how do we get the product managers to involve product owners when they go to talk to customers and figuring out ways to bind them. That's what I've seen work well. If you look at the the responsibilities of those two roles in SAFe, there's quite a bit of overlap. So both of them connect to the customer while the product manager is defining the strategy vision. The product owner should be contributing to it. So they really need to be part of a team, whether that's a virtual team or whether you make a decision that product owners should be part of the product discipline, which I think makes sense in a lot of cases. That's what I would do. We need to acknowledge the challenge that a lot of classic technology organizations or IT organizations have with figuring out, the product discipline. When you go to organizations that never had a real product function, they don't have product managers and they don't have product owners. A lot of the time, what happens is they take project managers or business analysts or technical leads and they ask them to be product owners because Scrum and SAFe tell them to have product owners. And it's not just a SAFe issue, it's the challenge of how do we create a product discipline in the organization? Neither those people or the stakeholders around them expect them to be the stances that we're talking about here. So building a product function in an organization is a challenge. It's not going to be solved by SAFe and it's not going to be solved by Scrum. But Scrum and SAFe do provide transparency into, what is it that we need these people to focus on? Are they focusing on these things? Are they allowed or empowered to focus on these things? And, what's the organizational development work that we need to do to support that?
Thanks, Yuval. So the next question, I'm part of a SAFe environment and I have been for a while. You mentioned that SAFe is an evolutionary approach for traditional organizations. Does SAFe have any recommendations of ways to measure the evolution, the maturity of the organization itself?
Yeah. So SAFe talks about three types of measurements when we talk about measure and grow. I will suggest you look at the measure and grow article as part of the big picture. So maybe I'll go back here and have the picture in front of us. So if you look at the bottom right of the big picture, take a look at measure and grow, and essentially you'll find three categories. One is, are we achieving outcomes? So what are our goals? And are we seeing traction towards those goals? What I like to do is to make sure that that traction is measured using evidence. So think about evidence-based management and make sure that your measures are outcome-oriented. So even if you're using SAFe, I would go and read the evidence-based management guide and use some of the metrics in evidence-based management in the SAFe world. I actually recorded a video that maybe we'll share later on that talks about mapping EBM to SAFe's competency measure and grow framework. The other two beyond outcomes is flow metrics. So definitely look at flow metrics, the flow distribution, flow times, flow load, flow predictability. Improving flow is an indication that you're improving your ability to innovate, your time to market, and your ability to deliver value. It's not guaranteeing value. And the last one is competency. How good are we at the practices that we committed to practicing? SAFe uses, a practices-based competency framework. My preference is to complement that or even replace that with aligning to principles. Are our ways of working aligned with the principles of agility? So I created an assessment technique that focuses on aligning to principles. Those principles are somewhat aligned to the SAFe principles, but a bit more generalized. And again, you can find that if you go into my site, you'll find that, and we can share the link for that as part of the slides later on.
Thanks, Yuval. So product owner slide showed a team backlog. I always focus on the product backlog, a single backlog that any team can work from and on, ensuring that all teams are always working at the highest priority. Team backlogs, in my experience, are favor keeping everybody busy versus prioritization. Can you explain your thoughts there?
Yeah. So the way I look at it, and SAFe looks at it, the art backlog, and maybe let's actually use this approach. If you look at the relationship between these backlogs, the art backlog is that single product backlog that keeps all of the teams aligned towards outcomes and working on the top priority things. Features from the art backlog are pulled into team backlogs based on priority, whether it is in PI planning or during the PI. And through that approach, we both have a situation where you're prioritizing across those teams, and the teams can focus on the work that they need to do right now on their features. There is the question of how do we make sure that there's the right pool and synchronization between those team backlogs and the art backlogs. But that's the intent of this approach. This is how SAFe approaches this challenge, Scott.
Great. Thanks, Yuval.
But again, maybe before you go into the next question, I think it's a valid concern, right? The team backlogs create silos and teams that are just focused on their issues. But the way to guard against that is to double down on managing the priorities in the art backlog and look at art level Kanban boards that look at the features and look beyond what each one of the individual teams are working on. The bigger challenge I see is when teams are actually very specialized and they can't even take the most important thing from the art backlog. But again, transparency will show you that that's the case, that this team is actually working on some lower priority stuff. And hopefully you'll use that transparency to try and see, okay, what can we do? Can this team learn how to work on new things and jump on other stuff? Good Agile release trains do that as part of their PI planning process. They don't pre-bind all of the features to teams, and they look for opportunities to reorganize around value and work on improving the team's versatility.
So, do you have a top or some examples of flow metrics that organizations are utilizing or should measure as far as utilization?
The one metric
Measurement?
to rule them all is flow time. So flow time for stories at the team level, for features at the Agile release train level, for significant initiatives called epics in SAFe at the portfolio level, are a good indication of both your ability to innovate as well as your time to market. So that's where I would start. In order to improve your flow time, you'll need to do a couple of things. You'll need to reduce the amount of things that you're focused on. You'll need to focus on flow load or work in process. And you'll need to start focusing on work item aging. Work item aging is not a safe flow metric. It's one we use in Kanban and professional Scrum with Kanban, but I find it very useful in order to see, okay, which are the stories or the features or the epics that are taking way longer than others to get to where they are right now. So those are the ones we might want to focus on and pay attention and figure out what do we want to do with them.
Right. So, I think we probably have, excuse me, time for one or two more. Does SAFe attempt to define the role of the product manager, or do they use existing product management definitions from other organizations?
No, SAFe does define the product manager role. I see it as pretty much aligned to the classic definition of product management in the industry, while making clear expectations about, agility and outcome orientation, measuring, objectively via evidence, that, pragmatic marketing at least didn't used to talk about these days. Classic product management does talk about those things. And, if you look at the product profession, more and more product managers don't really look at pragmatic marketing. They look at, other product leadership bodies, mainly coming from more modern technology organizations. But even when compared to that, the definition that SAFe provides, both for product management and product owners, as let's call them junior product managers, is pretty much aligned to these walls. There's more, there's more of a difference between the perceived position of people like Marty Kagan and Melissa Perry and what Scrum and SAFe talk about than the actual differences in definition. And one explanation to that is, that people like Melissa and Marty are looking at how organizations are actually implementing product ownership and product management in the trenches, and they don't like what they're seeing. But we don't like, professional Scrum trainers like me don't like a lot of what we're seeing either in many organizations that are, trying to become product oriented and just slap names on existing behavior. So we have a common enemy here, or a common goal or a mission to help organizations become more product oriented. It's kind of a shame that we spend our time, throwing mud at each other.
I think that's a great way to end, Yuval. Let's work together. If we're going to help organizations be successful, let's work together. And there is no right or perfect answer. It's all about what's best for that organization and the culture and the structure and everything within that organization. So I want to thank you, Yuval, for taking the time today. Thank you to the audience for listening. And we'll have the slides available within the next 24 hours, as well as a recording on the website. And Yuval will do his best to answer any of those questions we weren't able to get to. So with
Yeah.
that, thank you all very much. Have a great rest of your day and stay safe. Thanks all.